The afternoon air clung to the windshield like a thin layer of gold. The city was quiet in that in-between hour where traffic thinned, and light took on a softness usually reserved for memory. Emily drove slowly, not from caution, but from the kind of calm that follows a long day. Jake sat beside her, head tilted toward the window, one finger scrolling through his phone, the radio murmuring a gentle tune neither of them was really listening to. Between them, silence wasn't distance, it was comfort. As they turned onto a shaded avenue, ancient trees leaned inward, like old friends sharing secrets. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in fractured beams, painting the dashboard in warm amber. That's when it happened. So fast, it broke the moment in half. A blur darted into the street. Emily's foot slammed the brake. The tires screeched. Jake shouted something sharp and instinctive. But before they could make sense of it, the car gave a strange jolt from behind. Emily's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The back window, once slightly cracked, was wide open. And there, huddled deep in the rear seat, was something that didn't belong. A dog. A German shepherd, barely recognizable. His fur was coated in dust, clinging in clumps like old wounds. His ribs strained against his skin. He looked like a creature shaped by fear, ears pressed back, tail tucked so tightly it nearly vanished beneath him. And yet, more haunting than his body were his eyes, brown, dark, and unfathomably deep. Eyes that didn't dart around like a wild animal's. They were fixed, on them, as if asking something more ancient than language. Jake slowly turned, brow furrowed in disbelief. Did it jump in? But Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. Her breath had caught somewhere between her chest and throat. Because in that gaze, trembling but focused, there was no randomness, no accident. He had chosen them. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. This dog hadn't wandered into a gas station or barked at strangers. He had launched himself into a moving car. Their car. He had trusted the soft evening light, the lull of music, the feel of slowing tires, and chosen them. Jake moved, just a little, his hand brushing the door handle. The dog flinched violently, a whimper escaping his throat, so quiet it barely registered as sound. Not pain. Reflex. Raw terror. Jake froze, hand suspended in air. He's hiding, Emily whispered, barely audible, her voice blending with the hum of the tires. Not from hunger, not from cold, from something worse. The silence inside the car deepened. Not the kind that fills awkward spaces, but the kind that descends in sacred moments. Thick, aware, reverent. The radio still played, but it had faded into the distance like a soundtrack that no longer belonged to this scene. The only sound now was the ragged breath of the dog, quick, shallow, uneven. A rhythm not born of exertion, but of barely contained panic. He wasn't panting. He was bracing. Emily turned in her seat. Slowly, carefully. Her eyes met his again, and this time they didn't look away. In that stillness, a question seemed to hang in the air, spoken by neither human nor dog, but understood by both. If I trust this time, will I be broken again? Jake shifted uncomfortably. We can't keep him, he said, low, like he already regretted it. You know that, right? And it was true. They didn't know if he was sick, or dangerous, or even meant to survive the night. But Emily couldn't respond, because her heart was already answering with something louder than reason. We can't leave him. The dog hadn't moved, hadn't growled or lunged or made himself big. He'd done the opposite, folded in on himself like a crumpled letter, one never sent, never read. His posture said everything. I'll disappear if you want me to. Just, please don't. Jake reached again for the door. The handle clicked softly, but before he could open it, the dog lifted his head, not in defiance, not in fear, but with the slow, exhausted dignity of someone on the edge. His eyes met Jake's, not wild now, but heavy, like stone weathered by storms. "If I leave now, I won't survive the night," those eyes said. "But I understand if you need me to go." Jake froze. The door stayed closed. "Why us?" he asked softly, as if asking the air. Emily didn't answer, not out loud, but she knew. Because when the world breaks something enough times, it stops trying to save itself. And maybe, just maybe, it tries one last time. Not because it believes, but because it hopes someone else still does. Emily tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She didn't drive away. She didn't open the door. She just stayed. And behind them, in the twilight-soaked back seat, the trembling dog named Tyson let his head fall gently back down, still scared, still broken, but just a fraction less alone. The road unwound before them in silence, flanked by trees whose shadows stretched long across the pavement like reaching arms. Emily drove without speaking, her eyes drifting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, checking on the fragile presence curled in the back seat. Tyson hadn't moved, not a paw, not an inch. His breathing was still shallow, but no longer jagged. It was the breath of someone who'd been running for too long and had only now stopped. Not because the danger was gone, but because his legs had simply given out. Jake stared straight ahead, his hand resting loosely on the window edge. Every so often, his fingers would twitch, like he was still trying to process what had just happened. "He hasn't moved at all," he finally murmured, voice just above the hum of the engine. "He's afraid to," Emily replied, her own voice thin. "He thinks if he makes a sound, someone might notice he's still here." When they finally pulled into the driveway, night had settled fully. The last streak of light clung to the edges of the sky, like breath on glass. Emily turned off the engine, but kept her hand on the key, reluctant to let the quiet collapse. Outside, the wind rustled through dry autumn leaves, brushing against the house like a lullaby sung through cracks. Jake got out first, opening the door slowly, making no sudden moves. He retrieved a bag of groceries, then stood beside the car with the door ajar, waiting. Emily opened the back door on her side. The hinges creaked slightly, a sound that felt too loud in such a sacred moment. Tyson didn't flinch, but he didn't lift his head either. He was still pressed into the seat corner, as if bracing for a blow that hadn't come yet, but still might. She crouched beside the door and reached in, not to grab him, but to offer something. A cold piece of leftover chicken, held gently in her palm. He didn't move toward it. His eyes shifted slightly, nostrils twitching, but he didn't stretch forward. Hunger was there, but it was tangled in something older, something deeper. The belief that food always came with consequences. Jake appeared at her side. "Let me get a blanket," he said softly, already turning. When he returned, Emily gently placed the chicken on the floor, then pulled the blanket around Tyson's frail frame. Not tightly, just enough. Enough to say, "You're allowed to be still." She slid her hands under him with slow, deliberate care. He didn't fight. He didn't help either. His body yielded the way empty things do. Soft, limp, as if the world had already taken what it wanted. "You're lighter than I thought," she whispered, not to him, but to the ache rising in her own throat. He smelled like rust and old ash. His ribs pressed into her arms like fragile twigs. And yet she carried him. Because someone had to. The house was warm, not just in temperature, but in spirit. soft yellow light spilling from the ceiling, the faint scent of cinnamon lingering from earlier in the week. Emily stepped carefully over the threshold. Tyson wrapped gently in the blanket, his head tucked beneath her chin, like something too fragile for air. Jake moved silently, pushing the door open wider, his eyes never leaving the bundle in her arms. No words passed between them. There was no space for language here, only gestures, only presence. She set Tyson down on a corner of the old woven rug, the one by the fireplace, that hadn't been lit in years. It was the spot their old cat had loved, the one they still instinctively stepped around, even after he passed. Emily smoothed the blanket over Tyson's bony back, then stepped away, just a few feet, not far, but far enough. She didn't want him to feel trapped, but she also didn't want him to feel abandoned. Tyson didn't move. He curled tighter, his tail wrapped around his belly, his paws tucked beneath him. His breathing trembled like thin branches in the wind, barely noticeable, but constant. His eyes remained open, stretched wide, as if afraid that closing them might transport him somewhere else, somewhere cold, somewhere cruel. Jake set a bowl of water down beside him, then a small scoop of dry food. He paused, crouched on the other side of the room, rubbing the back of his neck. "We don't know anything about him," he said, his voice a murmur. "Not where he came from, not what's wrong, not if we're making this worse." Emily didn't answer right away. Her eyes never left the dog. "He just needs time," she whispered. "Time where no one yells, no one touches unless he wants it. Just stillness." The room fell into that kind of stillness, not empty, but full. Every creak in the floorboards, every shift in the wind, every tick of the old clock felt louder, sharper, yet none of it felt threatening. Outside the window, across the yard, a faint flicker of light caught Emily's eye. The neighbor's window. A small figure stood framed in it. Leo, the boy next door, 9 years old, silent as falling leaves. He wasn't waving. He wasn't moving. He was just watching, eyes wide, body still, wearing an oversized white t-shirt that reached almost to his knees. His gaze wasn't curious. It was reverent, as if he understood something the adults did not. Emily met his eyes through the glass. She didn't wave. She simply nodded, and Leo nodded back. That was enough. Some understandings don't need words. Back on the rug, Tyson's eyes remained wide, the food untouched, the water still. But in that corner, something had shifted. Not relief, not trust, but the smallest flicker of a new question. What if this time someone stays? And in answer, Emily simply stayed. Morning came in soft gold. Sunlight spilled gently through the thin curtains, casting long, syrupy streaks across the wooden floor. The house didn't wake with alarm clocks or clatter. It exhaled into the new day. Emily stepped out of the kitchen with a steaming mug cupped between her hands. She walked past the couch, past the window, and paused, her eyes settling, as they always did now, on the rug by the fireplace. Tyson hadn't moved. Not much. His head rested on the edge of the blanket, eyes half-lidded, but not fully closed. His body no longer trembled the way it had that first night, but it held a quiet tension, like a taut wire stretched beneath his fur. He wasn't afraid exactly, but he wasn't safe either. His breath came in small, measured puffs, like a creature used to bracing for impact. Emily didn't go to him. She didn't call his name. She simply sat on the edge of the couch, warm cup cradled in her palms, and let the silence hang between them, like a thread gently pulled taut. Not tight, not strained, but real. Later, when she stepped outside to breathe in the cool morning air, she saw him. Leo. The boy sat on the front porch steps, back pressed against the wooden beam, a thick sketchbook resting on his knees. His head was bent, brown hair tumbling over his eyes, fingers moving steadily with a short, dull pencil. He had no jacket, though the breeze held a bite. He didn't seem to notice, or mind. He looked like he'd been sitting there for a long time. Leo never said anything. He rarely did. He had what the school called selective mutism, a quiet that wasn't from shyness, but from somewhere deeper. A silence he'd chosen like armor, the kind that made the world feel less sharp. He hadn't spoken to Emily in months, but he came every morning now, just to sit, just to draw. And each day, he placed a cookie at the door, sometimes gingerbread, sometimes plain butter, sometimes oddly shaped ones his mother had baked the night before. He never waited to see if they were eaten. He just left them like offerings, like a small sacred ritual. Emily didn't stop him, neither did Tyson. At first, Tyson didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even seem to notice the boy, but Emily watched, closely, patiently, and noticed the tiniest change. Tyson, who had once flinched at shadows, now lay quietly, still guarded, still tense. But when Leo sat down, he didn't pull back. He didn't press himself further into the wall. He watched, he listened, and slowly, like leaves drifting to the ground, he began to stay a little looser. The food bowl remained mostly untouched. The water barely dipped, but every morning, Tyson stayed, and every morning, Leo returned. The rain came soft one morning, a slow patter against the porch roof. Emily assumed Leo might skip his visit. The wind carried a chill, and clouds hung low like tired eyelids. But when she opened the door, there he was. Hood zipped up to his chin, sketchbook in hand, water-speckled pencil already moving. He didn't flinch from the rain. He didn't shield his drawings. He just sat, his back straight, his knees pulled up slightly, sketching Tyson with the same slow reverence he always did. Tyson lay inside, just past the doorway, watching. That was the first day Jake noticed. He'd come to tell Leo to come in before he got soaked, but as he opened his mouth to speak, Tyson turned his head. Deliberately, a full, slow look. Not a startled flinch, not a glance born of instinct, a look. Jake froze mid-step, his voice catching behind his ribs. That single movement, a conscious shift of attention, felt heavier than any bark or wag. Tyson had acknowledged someone, not with sound, not with touch, but with presence. And it was Leo. Jake backed away, wordless. Something fragile was being stitched between the boy and the dog, and no adult had the right to interfere. From then on, no one told Leo what to do. No one asked him why he came. They just let him sit, let him draw, let him offer cookies to a dog who still hadn't taken a bite, but hadn't turned away either. Emily watched all this unfold from the kitchen window, heart tight but quietly blooming. Tyson hadn't begun eating regularly. He didn't seek out touch, but his eyes blinked slower now. His breathing, once a sharp staccato, had softened into longer exhales, and his tail, still curled, still tucked, no longer seemed locked in place. Sometimes at dusk, when shadows blurred the walls and the day lost its sharpness, Tyson would lift his head and look toward the door. Only for a second, but it was enough. Enough to say, I know someone's out there. Inside the house, Emily moved carefully. She no longer tried to coax Tyson. She'd stopped measuring his progress in steps. Instead, she measured it in pauses, in the moments he didn't flinch, in the seconds his gaze held steady. One night, as the lamp hummed and the room rested in half-light, she whispered quietly to herself, maybe he's not healing. Maybe he's learning to breathe again. And Tyson, curled tightly on the rug, didn't stir. But the rhythm of his breath fell in time with hers. Two quiet patterns in a house finally learning how to hold silence without fear. The night returned like a blanket, soaked in old memories. Emily had just settled into bed, the bedroom dimly lit by a soft night lamp. Jake was already asleep, one arm tucked beneath the pillow, the other resting lightly on the curve of her back. Tyson lay by the fireplace, wrapped in the same worn blanket, unmoving except for the rise and fall of his ribs. At 3:04 a.m., a sound tore through the quiet. Not loud, not drawn out. A strangled, broken sound like something caught in the throat of time itself. Tyson. Emily sat upright, heart hammering before her mind could even wake. She ran down the hallway barefoot, her chest tight with panic. In the flickering light from the street lamp outside, she saw it. Tyson thrashing, limbs stiff, mouth wide but not barking, just silent, raw air rasping past his tongue like he'd forgotten how to scream. His eyes were wide, but they weren't looking at the room. They were looking at somewhere else, somewhere far, somewhere dark. She dropped beside him, grabbing the soft fleece blanket, trying to wrap it around him like a second skin. Tyson, it's okay. You're okay now. You're safe. But he didn't hear her. His paws beat at the air, claws scraping against the floor, eyes locked on ghosts only he could see. A howl erupted, brief, torn from his chest, like it hadn't meant to escape, and then he collapsed, still breathing, still alive, but empty, hollowed. Jake rushed in seconds later, his face pale with sleep and fear. He stopped cold at the doorway. The scene didn't need words. Emily's arms around Tyson, the dog curled into himself, his tail twitching like it wanted to flee but didn't remember how. Only after long minutes, with whispered reassurances and steady breathing, did Tyson calm. His eyes blinked slowly now, no longer wild, but dulled by exhaustion. He didn't look at her, but he allowed her to stay. That morning, with the sun barely brushing the porch railings, Jake spoke carefully over coffee. I think we should take him to Walter. Emily nodded. There was no discussion to have. Walter had seen things, had survived things. Maybe he would know how to read the scars Tyson couldn't voice. Walter's clinic sat at the edge of town, a pinewood house folded beneath maple trees. A quiet man with thick glasses and rolled-up sleeves, he moved like someone who had carried too much grief and refused to put it down. When Jake lifted Tyson from the back seat, the dog didn't struggle. He didn't lift his head. But when Walter stepped out onto the porch and looked at him, something shifted. The way he holds his body, Walter murmured. It's not fear, it's memory. That's a working dog. Jake blinked. You're sure? Walter nodded slowly, eyes tracing Tyson's frame like reading a page. Standard issue callus, harness mark near the scapula, training posture. He didn't learn to love, he learned to obey. And for the first time, someone said it aloud. He was a soldier, not just a stray, not just broken. A hero, lost by the very system that had built him. The world outside Walter's clinic seemed to hold its breath as they left. Tyson wrapped once again in the blanket that had become more like armor than comfort. The sun had dipped low, dragging shadows across the dashboard as Jake drove in silence, one hand tight on the steering wheel, the other occasionally flicking the blinker, even when there was no turn. Walter hadn't given them much. No diagnosis, no step-by-step plan, just a truth that had gutted them both. Some dogs don't get to retire. Some dogs just disappear. Emily sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window but not seeing anything. In her mind, she replayed what Walter had told them, how Tyson had once belonged to a K-9 unit, how he had likely lost his handler in some operation gone wrong. The chip in his neck had been disabled, intentionally. Someone had made sure no one could find him again, a soldier cast aside. And now he slept behind them in the back seat, fragile as silence, breath barely stirring the folds of the blanket. That night at home, the stillness in the house was heavier than usual. Emily tried to distract herself, folding towels, straightening the cushions, moving from task to task like steps in a dance she didn't want to perform. Jake wandered out to the porch, letting the door creak shut behind him. Tyson stayed on his rug, but at 11:53 p.m., the night cracked wide open. It started with a siren, a distant, rising wail, just a patrol car somewhere blocks away. But to Tyson, it was a detonator. He bolted upright as if struck by lightning, his legs locked, eyes wide, pupils swallowed in black. Then came the low growl. Not at the sound, but at the memory the sound pulled from the pit of him. Emily had just stepped into the hall. She saw it unfold in frames. Tyson backing away, his mouth open, chest heaving, trembling harder than she'd ever seen. And then the howl, long, piercing, grief-shaped. He threw himself into the corner near the bookshelf, knocking over a lamp, his body spasming with fear that had no words, only shape, only breath, only collision. Jake came running, but the moment he moved, Tyson twisted and slammed his head into the wall in blind panic, then collapsed. They dropped to the floor beside him, neither daring to touch him yet. His eyes were wild, darting, trapped in something no voice could reach. "Tyson," Emily whispered, "you're home. No crates, no handlers, no pain." But he didn't hear her, because he was back there, where the scream of a siren meant death, where gunshots had torn through the air, where Mark, his handler, had fallen just inches away, where he had watched the only person he trusted bleed out on a classroom floor. And somewhere deep inside, Tyson's soul cracked under the weight of remembering. Jake turned off the siren sound from the old news clip playing on the muted TV, but it was too late. The damage had already unspooled. Tyson was shivering uncontrollably now, eyes wide open but seeing nothing in the room. Emily knelt beside him but didn't reach out. She knew not to, because whatever held him, whatever world he'd fallen into, wasn't one touch could fix. All she could do was anchor herself there, a silent promise. "I'm not going anywhere." She reached slowly for the fleece blanket and wrapped it around his body like one would wrap a baby in a storm, tight enough to feel weight, soft enough to feel care. Her voice stayed low, steady. "You're safe, Tyson. You're safe." After long minutes, the shaking slowed, not stopped, never completely stopped, but enough that Emily dared place her hand on his shoulder. His muscles didn't jerk this time. They just twitched, like echoes of thunder after the storm had passed. And then, a tear. It slipped down the fur of his face so slowly, she almost missed it. Not from injury, not from sound, but from memory. From a place where his name had once been called with love, then never again. Jake crouched beside her, his eyes red-rimmed. "We have to do more than just wait," he whispered. Emily didn't look away from Tyson. "We are doing more," she said. "We're staying." Later that morning, as the world blinked into dawn, Emily made a quiet decision. She sat on the rug with Tyson curled beside her and whispered gently, "We're going to give you a new memory now, one with water, one with touch, but no pain. A bath, not for cleanliness, for reintroduction. A way to show him that hands didn't always hurt. Jake laid out the towels across the floor. Emily prepared the basin, pouring warm water slowly so the sound would feel like a brook and not a warning. When Jake approached Tyson, he didn't reach for him. He sat first. Let Tyson see him. Then he whispered, not a command, just a truth. No one's taking you away again. When they guided him to the bathroom using a soft lead, he didn't resist. His steps were heavy, each one like wading through molasses, but he followed. The bath was not a miracle, not right away. When the water touched his fur, he flinched hard, muscles locking as if expecting a blow. Emily froze, then poured again, slower this time, just a gentle stream sliding down his back. Jake worked in silence, rubbing soft foam through his coat with hands that did not push, only circled. And then it happened. Tyson leaned forward, not to escape, not to run, just one half step, enough to sniff Jake's hand. Then his damp nose touched Jake's knee. It lasted a heartbeat, but it was enough to make Emily gasp, enough to make Jake stop breathing. A single gesture. I don't trust yet, but I'm trying. The days that followed passed like whispered pages turning. No great leaps, no sudden healing, but the atmosphere inside the house changed, almost imperceptibly. Where silence once carried the weight of fear, now it simply existed. Tyson no longer flinched at Emily's footsteps. He didn't dart from the sound of a closing door. He stayed, still cautious, still guarded, but present. Each morning, Leo came, never missing a day. His sketchbook more worn now, its corners frayed from use. But he sat on the porch as always, back straight, eyes steady. He still didn't speak, not to Emily, not to Jake, just to Tyson, through lines drawn carefully on soft paper. Tyson never approached him, but he watched. Every movement of Leo's pencil, every tilt of his head, every slight furrow in his brow. Tyson saw it all. Not with suspicion, but with quiet alertness, like watching the slow blooming of a flower you don't yet know the name of. And then one afternoon, it happened. It began like any other day. The sun had tilted low in the sky, gold pooling across the porch and spilling into the yard. Leo sat on the top step, sketching with his chin resting on his knees. A cookie, today it was gingerbread, rested beside him. From the alley came laughter. 3 boys, older than Leo. Familiar, cruel. Still drawing that freak dog? One called out. Another laughed, tossing a pebble across the yard. What's the point? He doesn't even look at you. Leo didn't answer. He never did. He just hugged his sketchbook tighter to his chest. Then the third boy stepped forward. Dog's as mute as you are. Leo tensed, his small shoulders folding inward. But before he could retreat, Tyson moved. He rose from his rug inside the house, stepped through the open door, and walked into the yard. Not fast, not with noise, but with the deliberate calm of a guardian reclaiming his post. His steps were even, measured, a line drawn in earth. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply stood between Leo and the boys, eyes locked, body still as stone. The boys stopped. One of them took a step back. That dog, he murmured. It's looking at us like it knows something. They turned and ran. The air remained thick for a moment, pulsing with the echo of what didn't happen. And then Leo spoke. A single word, a name. Tyson. It was soft, barely a whisper, but it cracked something open in the sky. Tyson turned, not slowly, not cautiously, but as if he'd heard something real for the first time in years. His eyes found Leo's, and he tilted his head. Just slightly, just enough. I heard you. Leo stepped forward, and with both hands trembling, placed one palm on Tyson's shoulder. No one else moved. No one else spoke. Because some moments are too holy for explanation. The next morning came soft as breath. Sunlight, golden and drowsy, crept across the rug by the fireplace, where Tyson lay, eyes half closed, tail stretched not tightly beneath him, but gently beside. Emily sat nearby, one hand resting on his back, not stroking, just resting, just reminding. She watched him with a kind of reverence usually reserved for saints, because in the past weeks Tyson hadn't just survived, he had chosen to stay. Jake walked in holding 2 mugs of coffee, setting one down beside her. "You think he remembers who he was?" Emily nodded faintly. "Maybe not in words, but in bones, in breath. I think he remembers everything." There was something new in Tyson's body now. A looseness, not freedom, not joy, at least not yet, but ease. The kind that came when you realized you no longer needed to run. And then Leo arrived, as he always did. Barefoot this time, sketchbook tucked under his arm, a butter cookie in one hand. He didn't knock, didn't speak, but he sat beside Tyson, not carefully, comfortably. Tyson lifted his head and wagged his tail, just once. A small movement, soft and unsure, like a match flickering in a still room. Emily gasped. Leo smiled, and Jake, his voice thick, whispered, "That's it, boy. That's all we needed to see." Later that evening, as twilight draped itself across the porch, Leo reached into his sketchbook and pulled something free. A drawing, charcoal and smudged edges, but clearly Tyson. Strong, still, and smiling in a way only Leo could see. He handed it to Emily. "Thank you," she whispered, brushing her thumb over the page. Tyson looked up, eyes warm, soft, and in that moment, no words were needed. Days passed like quiet songs. The house no longer creaked with fear, only with weather and time. Tyson began to rise earlier, stretch longer, sleep deeper. Sometimes, when the air was still and Leo was near, he would rest his head on the boy's knee, not heavy, not possessive, but like someone remembering how to share the weight. Emily often caught herself smiling at the smallest things, the way Tyson now drank water without glancing over his shoulder, the way his tail would sometimes twitch in sleep, not from fear, but from dreams. One morning, Emily awoke before the sun. The house was silent, blanketed in that thick pre-dawn hush. She walked into the living room and found him, still on the rug, eyes open, but different, not alert, not afraid, peaceful. She crouched beside him, placed her hand gently on his side. He blinked, slow, then exhaled, and didn't breathe in again. The stillness was immediate, but not cold, not empty. There was warmth in it, like a candle burning itself to the final wick, not extinguished, but fulfilled. Emily didn't cry right away. She just sat there, her hand on the fur that had once trembled beneath every touch. Jake came in soon after, said nothing, just sat beside her. They stayed like that. 3 souls, one no longer breathing, but no less present. Later, when Leo arrived and saw the still form on the rug, he didn't ask what had happened. He knelt, opened his sketchbook, and began to draw. That night, they buried Tyson beneath the tallest maple tree in the yard, the one that caught the golden light best in autumn. They wrapped him in the same blanket he had come to trust, placed the drawing Leo had made inside, and covered him with earth, softened by rain. No speeches, no ceremony, just silence, and a cookie, left gently on the stone. Weeks later, Emily found herself reaching for the food bowl before remembering. But instead of grief, what filled her chest was something softer, not the absence of Tyson, but the echo of him. In Leo's quiet smiles, in Jake's unspoken pauses, in the way the house still hummed with a new kind of peace, and in the final sketch Leo gave her, Tyson, standing strong, eyes bright, tail raised, not as he died, but as he must have once lived, as he'd allowed himself to live again. Beneath it, Leo had written a single sentence in soft, childlike print. He came to protect someone. He stayed because someone protected him. Emily framed the drawing, and every time she passed it, she whispered quietly, "You were never just a dog. You were someone's soldier. And now, you're our home."